Well, thank you, Bhavan, for playing this video. Obviously, I would normally be in the classroom tonight talking to you in person, and we would probably be starting in general the first chapter that I want to go over, which is all about news and reporting. But what I thought I'd do this time, since I am actually in Houston tonight at a swim meet, watching my son swim his final college swim meet in the Big West Championships, as well as my daughter. But I still wanted to make sure that you guys at least got off to a good start so that when I come back next week, that we can kind of get right back into news gathering and reporting, and you can kind of have a basis for where we're headed. So that is why I want to give you sort of the first couple of what I would have done slides of this lecture on YouTube here, and then I'll have an assignment here at the very end for you that will hopefully build on some of the skills that I'm going to share with you now. So let's talk about what is news. You've heard of that term. You've heard, oh, it's making news, or had you see the news tonight, or have you heard the news, right? And you've probably wondered, well, how do I define exactly what news is? And so I wanted to kind of give you my sort of my definitions for it. I think honestly, if you look at other textbooks, there are slightly different definitions for what makes something newsworthy, but these are kind of my go-to. And so if you ever see this on a quiz, these are the ones that you really want to pay attention to in terms of what makes something newsworthy. So first of all, timeliness, right? We are interested by what is happening right now. News is new. All right. We're kind of what, basically, next item up, every time. And of course, there's stories that happen every day that are brand new that, we take interest in. And so much of that obviously is something that we automatically kind of, I think, sort of gravitate toward. I mean, think about it when you're on your social media, for example. Even if you're not looking for news, you're constantly scrolling on your X feed, your Facebook, your Instagram, your TikTok, whatever it might be. And it's always to look for something that's new, right? So it makes sense that news is new. It's timely. All right. The second one is called proximity. We're going to go over these in a little more detail here in a second, but proximity is things that happen close by. Then we have prominence, which is the more important a person, the more valuable he or she is as a news source. We're interested in important people, and this can have a wide-ranging impact. Everything from obviously politicians to celebrities to athletes. We're interested in famous people, right? Then we have consequence and impact, which events that affect a great many people have a built-in news value. And we'll talk a lot about consequence and impact this semester in a lot of different ways, but I've got some examples coming up here. And then finally, we have human interest, right? We are interested in things that I think that not just bring out the emotion and are unusual, right? But stories that are ironic that sort of, I think, I guess, climb above what is normal, right? So I always think that if you think of things that are viral on social media, things that just look unusual that you want to share, things that kind of like you look at and you're like, wow, that's amazing. That's human interest. So anyway, so let's get to each of these categories individually. So timeliness, right? Now, let me describe to you what you're seeing here on your screen. Now, again, I'm recording this the week before you actually see it. And obviously, January has been an extraordinary month, if you will, particularly when it comes to Mother Nature. We've had, obviously, a couple of major fire episodes. You'd have to be under a rock if you haven't heard about, obviously, the Palisades fire. And then, of course, the Eaton fire out there in Altadena next to Pasadena. And we've obviously had our own fire up here in Santa Clarita, the Castaic fire, which happened a week later. But I wanted to share with you sort of the story behind these photos real quick, and then kind of talk more about timeliness. So the photo on the left there is a pair of firefighters during the Palisades fire. I want to say this was taken probably around 2 or 3 in the morning, the first night that the fire broke out. And this photo was actually taken by Austin Dave, who works right here with us in MEA. In fact, you just obviously saw Austin. He gave you a tour of the studio just a short time ago. But anyway, Austin took that photo, and you might have heard that in the early hours of the fire raging through the Palisades, that firefighters ran out of water. And at first, of course, city officials said, "Oh no, that's not possible." But it turned out to be true that there was issues with water supply and water pressure. That I would say certainly contributed. I don't know if it would have prevented the fire from, burning all the way to the sea, but, might have slowed it. But anyway, I think if there's a photo here that kind of expresses that, Austin told me that these were two firefighters that were literally sitting there watching buildings and structures burn because they just didn't have any more water in those hoses to put the fire out or even try to put the fire out. So just an amazing photo that I thought I'd share with you. And certainly if you had been following the news that night, which I'm certain most of you were, because these types of things, breaking news like fires, earthquakes, maybe heavy rainstorm. These are things that we often follow up to the minute because they affect us, right? And I'm sure that you probably knew somebody that lived in the Palisades or in the Eaton fire over there by Pasadena. I know I certainly did, who may have lost their home or at the very least had to flee in the middle of the night to get to safety. So, by the way, the photo on the right there, that is actually the Castaic fire. And if you guys remember, that was very scary for a short amount of time. That happened just last week, or I guess third week of January, in which you had basically fire happened just on the what would that be? The east side of Castaic Lake, just north of Valencia. And of course, that for a time that afternoon and then that evening, there was a real threat that homes in not just Castaic might go up, but obviously North Valencia as well. So anyway, two different fires, but obviously fires in January were certainly in the timeliness category, and we'll talk about proximity as well. But certainly, these are the kinds of things that makes news, I think, very important when you have huge stories that impact a great number of people. And the first thing we do oftentimes is we either are looking on our apps on our phone, we're going to our TVs and watching it on local news, maybe cable news, whatever, to get to the up to the minute information, and that's why news is timely. We also have proximity. I thought I would use this example. Proximity obviously is, again, stuff that happens close to us is far more interesting than stuff that's far away. So I've always used the example in past classes that take a I don't know, take a bad traffic accident that happens in Boston, Massachusetts. Now, in Boston, that's a big deal because obviously, not only is it a bad accident, is it going to be, tying up, probably, roads that, people are trying to get from point A to point B. But it's also very possible that if it's a huge accident, that there's probably someone that's going to know somebody in the Boston area that was involved in an accident, or at least you have a concern of that, right? But does that matter here? Not necessarily. That doesn't make news here, right? We just, here 2,900 miles across the, to the west, we're not so much worried about things like that happen on a daily basis in other cities and other areas. But if it happens here outside on the 5 freeway or at the intersection of Valencia and McBean, or even down, for example, in the Newhall Pass, we certainly pay attention because it does have a great effect on us. And I'm sure there's, some of you who have come, been here to campus in the past who live in, say, the San Fernando Valley trying to get here have probably been affected at some point by a bad accident on the 5, either going northbound or southbound, and then either being late to work, late to school, having trouble getting home. It all makes, so again, something that happens close by is going to be under the proximity window. Now, what are we looking at here? The headline is from the Signal, by the way, the new COC board taking a second look at low income student housing. So the story goes is that the COC was considering spending about $62 million on providing low income housing kind of out there near where the parking garage is on off of McBean there, right here on campus. And then the COC Board of Trustees, that's the body, by the way, here on campus that essentially decides everything financial. Last August, they made the decision to put that project on hold with I think the objective to not do it because they thought it would just be too much money for the district and for taxpayers to kind of withstand. And well, as fate would have it, this past Friday, with a brand new board in place, because we had an election back in November, not just a presidential election, but we also had some local stuff. Well, we have new board members on there who have a different opinion of that, and so they have decided that they would like to build that housing on campus at the cost of $62 million. And of course, the critics are not happy about that because they say that that could be far more than just $60 million, which, honestly, I believe they're correct. But that being said, that was a big story, coming out of Friday's COC Board of Trustee meeting. And it's something you will probably hear more about because certainly if you go to school here and they start, they eventually start building that project, either you or perhaps siblings or friends will obviously have to deal with the fact that there's going to be massive construction on that side of the campus, and that could be problematic. But on the other side, if you have someone that that is looking for obviously a place to live, rent a place where they can afford to live, certainly affordable housing, if they do build it, will happen here at COC. Take the politics out of it. That's kind of the crux of what's going on. So anyway, that's an example of proximity. I found that, by the way, that article in the Signal, which is your local paper, which we can talk about a little bit later. All right, next up we have prominence. Now, prominence is the idea that in news, what makes something newsworthy? Oftentimes, we pay attention when somebody does, a celebrity, a politician, a famous athlete does something, we pay attention to it, right? So a couple of examples that I have on the screen for you right now, that is Beyonce from the Grammys this past Sunday, which for you would have been, a week and a half ago. But in any event, she won Best Album, I think it was Best Album of the Year. I could be wrong about that, but it was, and believe it or not, Beyonce, the pop star, actually got it, and she sang a lot of country on that. So I thought that was interesting. So obviously the Grammys made a lot of news just earlier this week, but Beyonce was probably at the top of the list for winning her Grammy for Best Album of the Year. Now, lower right, another story that obviously has swept and this is interesting because a lot of times, like for example, the Beyonce story might not be so newsworthy to a widespread audience, only because I would say that probably the interest in the Grammys has waned over the years. Certainly everyone knows who Beyonce is, but maybe if you go randomly up to 10 people on the street and say, hey, what's the latest on Beyonce? Would they be able to tell you that she won a Grammy? I would say some people would say it, but a lot of people might just kind of give you a look like I hadn't heard that, right? But down on the right here, I've noticed within the last couple of days that this story has really taken off, and that is the Lakers and Dallas Mavericks made a mega trade on Sunday. Basically, Anthony Davis, the Lakers' talented forward center, was shipped to Dallas, and Luka Doncic, who is considered, one of the best NBA players right now in the league, he was traded to the Lakers, and it was a trade that was top secret. Been reading a lot about it, but why I bring it up is because it's not just a sports story, it's actually a news story too, because I'm sure that, if you were around this past week, you probably heard that the Lakers made a huge trade. And it's interesting when, like, for example, um, sports transcends. And I mean, certainly, I will not have known what had happened when recording this, but we have Super Bowl, which, in my world is this Sunday. It'll be past tense for you, but that is Kansas City and the Philadelphia Eagles. And of course, the Super Bowl is always, kind of like the pinnacle of American culture every early February, and certainly falls under the prominence category. It will fall under the some different categories. Timeliness, when you obviously see it on Sunday. It doesn't really fall under proximity, right? Because it really isn't close by to us. But in any event, kind of prominence, right? Prominence is another something that makes something newsworthy. Then we have consequence and impact, and that is that there are issues that are political, economic, um, just in general that impact us, right? Stories that impact us, even if they happen close by, or they can happen halfway around the world. The fact is that consequence and impact is another major player when it comes to what makes something newsworthy. And of course, a couple of examples that I have from this past month, that on the upper left there is President Trump. I know you know who he is. Well, obviously he was inaugurated to be president again, earlier this month. And of course, he has been, he's come in with his own ideas on how he wants to run the country. And of course, there's been lots of different, he has people that he wants to appoint in different positions. And like today, for example, and it's also timely today, by the way. RFK Jr. was just voted to the full Senate to be confirmed. Whether he's confirmed by the full Senate remains to be seen, but he and both Tulsi Gabbard were the latest, cabinet members to be voted on. And so obviously anything that Trump does is going to have consequence and impact, whether you agree or disagree with it. The fact is that the president of the United States, whether it's Trump, it's Biden, Obama before him, and whoever comes after, right? Anytime that they make a decision, that has a major consequence and impact. Sometimes it has some more, some less, but certainly if he's making a decision, for example, on I don't know, let's say tariffs, because that was the big thing of the week here until recently, is charging Mexico and Canada and Panama and China, obviously they're charging them on when they're shipping goods here, charge them like sort of a tax, if you will. That's become a big economic story. And of course, that does affect us, in the store. When you go to buy something, sometimes prices go up based on decisions that are made, either in government or at the city council or the county. Maybe the county decides to, vote to raise a sales tax. That has an impact on us, right? Now, on the bottom right there, another consequence and story that's falling under the consequence and impact is immigration, right? The fact is that the Trump administration has a very aggressive policy toward immigration, legal immigration, if you will, and basically has kind of made it sort of their bedrock of their administration that they're going to start sending people who they think are here, illegally back to the country of origin, right? And so, of course, this has caused a lot of controversy and a lot of angst amongst folks. And so when I was actually putting this PowerPoint together, there were protests happening, not just here in Los Angeles, but all over the country, in regards to the Trump immigration policy. So anyway, that's consequence and impact. And then finally, we have human interest. And I know you would get a kick out of this picture. You're like, what is that? Well, that is actually a deer calling contest in Germany. So I guess Germany holds like this annual, I don't know if it happens in Munich, but somewhere in Germany. I found this basically on the Associated Press. There's a little section that, it highlights like odd stories. And I thought this was great. This is a great example of human interest, right? This, again, human interest has a far ranging definition to it as to why we're interested in it. It has everything from emotion to a viral nature to like basically if you're doing a story on someone that's battling cancer, right, and you read about someone who's battling cancer, that oftentimes can be that falls under the human interest category. So we're going to talk more about these kinds of things when we get to talking about storytelling. But this is something. But human interest is another aspect of what makes something newsworthy, and certainly, would I care about just a normal contest in Germany right here in Los Angeles? Probably not. But this is a deer calling contest, and this guy clearly, is excelling at it. So anyway, I thought that was kind of fun. So anyway, that's under human interest. So where do stories come from? Because in this upcoming assignment that I'm going to have you do very shortly, I'm going to ask you to find stories. And so you probably are going to say, well, okay. So some of you maybe are more journalistically journalism hound like myself and just kind of know instinctually where to go find stories. But even if you are a journalism hound, sometimes you need a little help, right? Or if you're new to this and you're coming into this class and you're like, this sounded interesting, to maybe do some content, maybe do some news. Well, like, where do I start, Dave? Well, certainly wire services are kind of really kind of the headwaters, as I like to say, of what makes something like what brings us news, right? So the two wire services, and I will mention this again, by the way, when we talk about news writing. But Associated Press and Reuters are kind of like your two main players when it comes to wire services. Associated Press has been around since I want to say the mid 19th century. There's a huge history behind it, which I won't bore you with, but just suffices to say that it was basically put together by a handful of newspapers at the time to share resources to basically utilize those resources to get news out across the country. Reuters was very similar in the way it does things. So anyway, so the Associated Press has, believe it or not, its own original reporting. It has its own staff, along with using other TV stations, newspapers, media outlets in which to basically constantly throughout the day be tracking news from not just here in obviously Los Angeles, but around the world. And so news organizations rely on the Associated Press and Reuters to constantly be updating news of the day. Now, the cool thing is that you actually can go to, you can use the web now, and apnews.com has its own website and it has its own news service. And so I'll show you that here in a second. I think I actually included that here. Anyway, news releases are another good thing that you can rely on. I'll be showing you an example of that here in just a second. They can be found online. You can go to organizations, and oftentimes they'll have like a section where you can actually find a news release. I get them all the time from various entities. You see the word Slack there. One of the things that we'll probably be doing is adding you to our what's called Slack, which a lot of news organizations are using these days. It's kind of our internal, I guess, messaging system. And so you'll be a part of that. So Austin and I will oftentimes share stories there in case you're looking for something. Agendas are also another another area in which you can pick up stories. Other media, obviously with the digital flow of information these days, your access to content, your access to media, to information is infinite. And so I have some examples there. And then of course, social media. And you're like, what about social media? Well, let me explain that here in just a second. But first, let's talk about wire services, right? Here's the AP, as I mentioned, started in the mid 19th century. And this is just a screenshot I took of apnews.com rather. I don't know, I want to say yesterday. And of course, at that point, they were talking a lot about tariffs. And I think yesterday, Mexico decided to pause the tariff battle for a month with Trump. And then I believe last night, Canada followed suit. And as of this recording, I know China is still kind of playing brinksmanship when it comes to tariffs, but who knows? Maybe that'll be solved by the time you guys see this in a week. You can also see some other stories on here. There's Beyonce announcing 2025 Cowboy Carter Stadium Tour, fresh off her Grammy wins, right? And then you have some stories on the Grammys there. Obviously, one of the things that happened late last week that was absolutely tragic was the plane crash in Washington, D.C., in which we lost, a combined, I think, 67 lives between, the airplane and, of course, the Black Hawk helicopter that, smashed into it. It included, a third of the flight, from what I understand, included all sorts of people associated with USA Gymnastics. Just a terrible tragedy. I still think they're trying to figure out what happened, but I do know that the plane itself, the jet, was cut into three pieces upon impact. It fell into the Potomac, and so the NTSB, National Transport Safety Board, and obviously FAA, et cetera. They've got folks that are pulling that stuff out of the wreckage out of the river so they could obviously figure out what went wrong. In any event, and there was another crash, by the way, right after that. This medical plane, this Learjet, basically slammed into a Philadelphia neighborhood the following day. So, as far as air travel goes, last week was not a great time. But anyway, that's what was on the wire services at that point. AP again, the other one being Reuters. As for news and press releases, here's an example of something I get almost on a daily basis. I get press releases in my inbox, and basically this one is from the city of Santa Clarita. I will get one from the college periodically. I get them from the county. I sometimes get them from other things that relate to me because I work obviously at ABC7, so I'm on a lot of mailers on that side of things. Anyway, the bottom line is we get these press releases, and it's just highlighting things that are either initiatives that the city is working on or things that are upcoming. So in this case, the dream wedding at the Big I Do. So I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but the city hall, let's see, it says, say goodbye to the hassle of wedding planning and let us handle the details. Our city hall ceremonies team takes care of everything, ensuring a stress-free experience from start to finish on Friday, February 14th, 2025. So this Friday, in the Canyon Country Community Center, they're going to have like a mass wedding, all the part of Valentine's Day. So why would they send this out? Why is this quote unquote newsworthy? Well, first of all, it's human interest, right? Something out of the ordinary, but it would make a great news story to go out with your camera or your pad and paper or your phone to like take pictures and kind of shoot all these couples that are getting married kind of all together, as part of Valentine's Day. I think it's kind of a neat idea. And from a standpoint of an interesting story, I think the city absolutely is smart to promote it. It's cool. All right, how about agendas? Right, we talked about like public meetings, right? So we have, generally every other Wednesday we have a public meeting here at COC for our board of trustees. They, for whatever reason, had an unusual one this past Friday, and I think it had to do with the fact that they had to postpone the last one because the Castaic Fire closed campus for a few days. But in any event, every other Wednesday, there is a board meeting, and by law, they have to publish an agenda on their website, and you can see, so you can go click on it. The city of Santa Clarita does the same thing. In fact, if you're a city or a municipality here in California, or honestly across the country, it's by law you have to kind of publish your agenda. And so I know that sometimes you think, how can a boring meeting be newsworthy? Well, it certainly can, because for example, this past Friday they voted to obviously decide to go ahead with student housing, even though a large segment of the population here in Santa Clarita wasn't thrilled about it. Well, that's obviously a news story. Whether you agree or disagree with that is irrelevant. It should be irrelevant as a journalist, but certainly to the community, it's a worthy story. There was, a couple of years ago, there was when it came to immigration, for example, there was something on the agenda at City Council basically deciding whether, the city of Santa Clarita should be a sanctuary city like Los Angeles is. And ultimately, the city of Santa Clarita voted no, but it took until like 3 a.m. to make that decision. So, and honestly, on a week-to-week basis or every other week basis, you have a section in which people can come up and speak publicly about things, complaints, whatever, to their board members. And oftentimes you can kind of find some really cool stories based on what people are are talking about. But the bottom line is that that's another place that you can find a potential story. All right, other media, right? So here's on the left, that's CNN.com. On the right is FoxNews.com. You have Google News. Certainly, there are other news blogs out there that you can take advantage of. Politico is another one, and I'm sure if you want to ask Bhavan a follow-up question after this lecture's over, I'm sure he's got some go-to stuff he likes to go to. I'm obviously a very big sports fan, so I have a number of sports sites that I visit, that contain sports news. There's obviously celebrity news, fashion news. I mean, there's just no shortage of, blogs out there and websites in which you can find media, but those are some examples right there. And then finally, we have social media, right? Which is, and you're like, okay, how do we make something, how do we find news in social media? Well, that's an easy one because there are always people posting about things that are happening, right? I mean, I think the most obvious one would be Twitter/X because, there's always a constant feed of links to news stories that are going through. There are people that are, obviously sharing their own opinion, microblogging, if you will, about various issues. That's obviously something that you can generate story ideas from. Facebook has community groups, like the Santa Cruz community is something that I follow. Castaic has its own section. There's all sorts of different groups on Facebook that you can follow and you can get story ideas from, or just enlightened to. Not to mention if you later in the semester when we start saying, hey, I want you guys to find a story. A lot of times I've had students who've basically gone into these groups to look around, see an issue that people are talking about, and then reach out to whoever's in charge of that and then whammo, they've got themselves a story. On the right there is Instagram. And I have, you may not know who Abby Weitzel is, but she is a, multi-Olympic medalist, competed in 3 different Olympic games. Well, she's also from Saugus High School, or I should say went to Saugus High School, and she was actually here last night doing a swim clinic with another Olympic athlete, and they were doing it for a local swim club. And so it's part of 20 different clubs she's going to visit across the country, and she's just so happened to do it here in her hometown. So anyway, that was something that was very newsworthy. And I actually went out and shot a bunch of video. I talked to Abby, it was cool. But anyway, so there's things you can find out every day in social media. And we'll talk more about that as the semester goes on, of course. All right. Well, last but not least, I'm going to have Bhavan probably hand out a hard copy of this, and he's going to get involved in this. Well, in your Canvas shell, there is an assignment that I would like you to do right after I get done talking here, which is to say, I want you to get into the habit of trying to find news stories that interest you and then tell me why. So you've just obviously finished watching me, What is Newsworthy, and a brief lesson by me on where you could possibly keep up with both local and national news, and obviously why news is relevant, right? Anyway, as part of this in-class exercise, I'd like you to choose 3 news stories. Please reflect on the 5 different aspects of why something is newsworthy, and then along with listing the headline of your 3 stories, read it and tell me why it made news to you. So be prepared when called upon at the conclusion of this exercise to share your results with the rest of the class. As an example, so the day that I created this actual assignment was shortly after the Castaic fire threatened homes and businesses. So majority of people would find that newsworthy. It is certainly timely. It is certainly close by, and has plenty of consequence and impact as well as human interest. So what I want you to do is select each of your 3 stories. Tell me why you selected it. Tell me how does it relate to what makes something newsworthy, right? Okay. And I guess why it made news to you, right? I think so for each of those 3, and then be prepared to talk about it when Bhavan goes around the room and, asks for volunteers, or if you guys don't raise your hands, I'll just have him make sure he calls on you. All right. So anyway, make sure you get this done. It's 15 points. It's an easy 15 points. And certainly when I get back next Tuesday, we're going to talk more about kind of what makes news, different categories of news. I'm also going to be sharing with you um, what kind of jobs you can find in the industry. So I'm super excited that you're here. I apologize that I'm, obviously not here in class tonight, but I just want to, thank Vavan for, subbing in for me tonight, and looking forward to hearing from him what you guys came up with, what is newsworthy. So good luck, and I will see you soon.